a very noted teacher, and that is Lord Buddha. And you'll see much later in the program, later in my talk, why I'm beginning this way. It said that the Buddhists have 3 jewels, or the triple gem, also known as the 3 refuges. And they take refuge in these 3 jewels. The most used chant in the Pali language goes, Buddham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha. Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma. And Sangham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha, or what we would call the Satsang, the spiritual community. So I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in the Sangha. Literally, it says, to the Buddha for refuge, which is Sharanam, Gacchami, I go. To the Buddha for refuge I go, or for protection I go. To the Dharma for refuge or protection I go. To the Sangha for refuge or protection I go. This is the cornerstone of the Buddha's teachings. I'll return to that later. First couple of things from various times. This is from the 1978 tour of Melbourne. This was Baba's last visit to Melbourne in 1978. Somebody asked, Baba, will you please explain the state of a saint? Baba says, the state of a saint is the state of God. Even though he has this human body, he becomes God. Even though he appears to be a human being, on the inside he attains consciousness. As he meditates continuously, his inner energy is unfolded, and he becomes the space of God, and then he attains the state of God. So this is nothing but that great state. When the body of the senses and the sense objects merge together, that is called sthiti, a state. Sthiti. A sthiti is a state or a condition, and it's from the Sanskrit root to stand. So, when we say to take a stand, so if you make a really strong stand inside your own being, then you have a state. The highest standpoint that you can have is to be in the state of consciousness, and take your stand in the aham, the consciousness itself, in the self. So that's the sthiti. Baba says, a miserable person is in the state of pain. I realize I've been talking about what are you being, beingness. I've been talking about that recently. So this is a miserable person, his beingness, his state, is a state of pain. A happy person is in a state of happiness. A deluded person is in the state of delusion. A lot of that around these days. In the same way, Baba says, there's a greater state in which you become absorbed in God. Therefore, a saint is in a state which is not this physical body. He becomes absorbed in consciousness. Just as when a person is diseased, his entire body, his breath, and his blood contain the germs of this disease, in the same way the nectar of God pervades every pore of a person in that state. If you ask me to explain that state as it is, the only way I can explain it is to be silent. Scriptures always say that it's like you cannot explain that state. And the great yogis, Vashishta, in the Yoga Vashishta, when Ram asked to explain the state, he just closed his eyes and was silent, because he could manifest the state, he could demonstrate the state, but he couldn't really explain it. So he said, in that state of silence, there are no thoughts. In that state, there's only love and peace. This is how the state of a saint is. He becomes immersed in God, anchored in God. He never has the feeling of ego. He is immersed in that. Therefore, become a saint, Baba says. Another way of saying it is bhavana rako, is to hold that state. You know, everyone passes through the state of a saint. We visit it. It's like a station on a train. We pass through it. We don't even know we're passing through it. And then before we know it, it's gone. But a state values that and makes his place there. He makes his stand in that state of consciousness. We don't know the art of seeing that state, and we don't know the art of staying in that state, or the art of returning to that state when we've lost that state. So this is the state of a saint. He's attained that pure state. Another one, from a similar time, just before that tour, this was in Ganeshpuri in 1978, just before Baba went on that tour. He gave an intensive in meditation on the self, intensive on the self, in January of 1978. And the commentator writes, Baba's talk on Saturday was rhapsodic. He kept breaking into song, sometimes repeating one line several times like a refrain. And this is from Baba's talk that day. He says, Baba said, when an age ends, there is deluge. There is water everywhere. There is water everywhere. In the same way, the self is everywhere. The self is everywhere. When you go on the road, you raise dust, and that dust rises in the air and begins to spread all over. You see its infinite particles. When that infinite dust arises, you see every particle of that dust shining and shimmering. So every particle of that dust contains a universe. This is very Yoga Vishishta. Every particle of dust has a universe. And you're living in one of those particles. And these worlds arise and subside, arise and subside. Baba's in a cosmic state here. He says every particle of dust is another universe. And in that particle of dust, there are a million particles of dust also, and more, smaller and smaller and larger universes. And the worlds subside and arise. And it is through the power of the self that our life exists. Know it through meditation. No consciousness. Understand the truth. Become aware of the truth. That is the self. You think that you see everything, but everything is seen because of that self, that consciousness. So what the great sage Uddalaka, and he's a sage from the Chandogya Upanishad, one of the ancient Vedic sages. There's some charming stories in the Chandogya Upanishad about Uddalaka. What he said is absolutely right. By obtaining the knowledge of that, everything else is known. You can spend your whole life acquiring knowledge of this and knowledge of that. But the Upanishads say that's only when you understand the knowledge of that. The Upanishads always refer to that as the ultimate knowledge. Knowledge of the self. Knowledge of pure awareness. So he says when we understand that, everything else is known. You don't have to make an effort, Baba says, to know things. First you reach the state where you say, I don't know this, I don't know this, I don't know this. But after you come out of that state, you say, yes, this exists, yes, that exists, yes, this exists, yes, this is this. This is also the same knowledge. Maybe I'm reading into it. I see the first part of that is Vedanta, and the second part is Shaivism. First part you say, I don't know anything. Second part is saying, I know all this. It's all consciousness, it's all God. This is the same knowledge. Your distinction between this exists and this does not exist vanishes. Then wherever you look, you see with that knowledge. You have the awareness of that knowledge. A Sufi saint said, now the Sufis, of course, are the mystical side of Islam, and they have great music called Qawwalis, and they're the whole succession of great gurus and disciples, a disciplic succession among Sufism. And Baba loved the Sufis. He would often chant Sufi chants and recite Sufi poetry. He says, a Sufi saint said, I'm not hearing, I'm not listening. God is hearing everything. It is God inside me who is seeing, not me. It is God inside me who is seeing, not me. It is my God who lives inside, who knows everything, not me. God is with me. I am with God. Whatever I see, everything is God. I don't see anything else but God. And God is giving this evidence, not me. That's why the Sufis were considered heretics for Islam, because they had the vision of God.